We're going to begin today at the Liberal caucus retreat. Liberal MP Alexandra Mendes is in Nanaimo, and she joins me now. Ms. Mendes, welcome to Power Politics.
Good afternoon, Mr. Crane. Thank you. Very glad to be here.
Thank you. Well, you heard yourself off the top there saying that your constituents say the Prime Minister needs to go, that the problem isn't the party, it's the leader. Why did you feel it was important to go on the record about this right now?
Well, because I'm supposed to convey the messages that constituents give me. That isn't the whole conversation, obviously, because once constituents tell you that, you go back to them and tell them, okay, but the government has significantly improved life for Canadians, and it has put forward a very inclusive and very progressive agenda. So what do you have to say to that? And most agree that, yes, the government has done very well in many aspects, particularly in building up our security net, our social security net. But there is this feeling about the Prime Minister that I really can't pinpoint to a single issue, but it seems to be very prevalent.
So your constituents, and you say they are adamant that this was dozens and dozens and dozens of people, not just one or two random people. What do you think, Ms. Mendes? Do you think, for the good of the party, for the good of your government, he should step down?
My personal opinion is no, he shouldn't, because, first of all, in terms of the process, this has come a bit like, out of nowhere. But secondly, I do think the Prime Minister history will be kinder to the Prime Minister and what he has put forward as a governing philosophy, but as very concrete policy too. So I believe that he certainly has worked very hard for Canadians, has worked very hard to improve Canadians' lives. Right. We've been faced with very, very strong headwinds in many different areas. And I think that's what right now is getting Canadians, well, my constituents anyway, extremely dissatisfied rather. But they can't actually pinpoint to a precise or specific issue. It's a very generalized kind of, oh, we're tired of his face kind of thing.
But if it was a specific issue, it'd be easier to solve. If it's just fatigue with the leader, it becomes a much more difficult and intractable problem. So I know the Prime Minister said he's spending the summer listening to Canadians and he's going to focus on delivering for Canadians. But do you think Canadians are willing to listen to him anymore at this point, that he can come back from the deficit he finds himself in?
Well, that is not the impression I got from my constituents. And when I say I spoke to dozens and dozens of constituents, I had two very precise moments where I heard from more than one or two. I had Canada Day, my most successful Canada Day event in my years as an MP. I had over 800 people, which in Quebec is a pretty good number. And then 3 days now in August, at the end of August in St. Lambert, where we had a booth and constituents were just coming by. And it was very generalized. They are unhappy with the Prime Minister. But why? And when you go and try to get it a little deeper, you don't know. So does the Prime Minister have an opportunity now, in the next session, in the next year, to bring Canadians back? I hope so. I definitely hope so.
You don't sound convinced, though. I mean, you sound hopeful but not optimistic, right? Because there is this desire for change, Ms. Mendes. We've seen chiefs of staff leaving your government. The National Campaign Director has announced that he is leaving. Seamus O'Regan resigned from Cabinet. Pablo Rodriguez may be resigning to run for the leadership of the provincial Liberal Party in Quebec. There's a lot of change happening, except at the very top. So, I mean, how do you view the situation right now?
Well, precisely. I mean, I don't know how to view the situation other than through the eyes of my constituents, whom are the people I'm supposed to represent. They are the ones I'm here, or in Ottawa, to represent. And I do have that feeling that they seem to think it's time for the leadership to change. Not necessarily the government, but the leadership. So, but again, there has been so much good done that warrants support from Canadians, and I hope to convey that message better, perhaps with my constituents, to make them see how how we have been there for them.
But you said earlier today, Ms. Mendes, that you were carrying the message of your constituents to the caucus as you gather in Nanaimo to tell the party leadership and to tell your colleagues. I wondered, are other colleagues hearing the same thing from their constituents? And have you heard from the party leadership since you made your comments today?
No, I haven't, and I haven't spoken to my colleagues yet. We haven't had, well, I've been crossing colleagues around the hotel, but I haven't spoken to anyone yet properly. So I'm not going to talk about my colleagues or what they have heard. But from the leadership, no, I haven't heard anything since this morning.
Do you believe that it is likely that a considerable number of your colleagues have heard similar things from their constituents? You look, it's been a tough 14, 15 months of polling at this point in time. You lost the St. Paul's by-election. You have another by-election coming up not far from your riding, just over on the island in La Salle-Verdun. Do you think you can win that seat with the leader's popularity being where he is right now, the party being where it is right now?
We're very, very confident that we'll win that seat. We've been working it, and I mean, all of us have contributed in one way or the other to ensure that Ms. Palestini will win that by-election. And again, it's going back to presenting or voters in this case with the alternative. What do you really want to happen? Do you think that if you show your dissatisfaction with the Prime Minister now, that is not endangering all the gains that we've made through the past 8, 9 years? And so when you ask that question, people start thinking again. They said, oh, maybe, yes, maybe you're right. Maybe it's better to stick with the Liberals. So we're hoping that that will translate into an election victory. But it is tight. No use in denying that. It is a tight by-election, and it takes all our efforts.
But, circling back to what we talked about, you hope that the Prime Minister can convince Canadians with the time he has left to give him another chance. If you can't convince the voters of La Salle-Verdun, how do you convince the rest of Canada? This is what I wonder. So, I know that's the big inflection point is coming on the 16th of September. I mean, what are your thoughts there? If you don't win that seat, what does it mean for the Prime Minister?
Well, it's a very, very negative message for sure. If that's what happens, that's a very negative message. And I guess we'll have another reckoning once the dust falls. But we'll wait until the 16th and really continue to work hard to make sure that Ms. Palestini wins that constituency.
So the bottom line is your constituents have told you that they want a change in the leadership of your party. You believe Mr. Trudeau has earned the right to stay, should he choose to do that, because of the good work that he's done. And you hope that it can change the mind of your constituents. So they are telling you loud and clear that you can't win if things don't change at the very top, because it's not the party, it's not the policies, it is the Prime Minister. Do you think you can win if you don't make a leadership change? Do you think the Liberals can win the next election if you don't make this change?
I'm not confident, to be very, very fair. I'm not even sure that Canadians will be listening to us by the point where we will be talking at the doors whenever the campaign happens. But I'm hoping that something does happen that will change their perspective. But I'm not terribly confident, no.
What about your own seat of Brossard-Saint-Lambert? You've won that 3 elections in a row with at least 50% of the vote each time. Very different dynamic going into this next election, assuming you're running again. Based on what your constituents have told you, if they don't like your leader and they want that change, do you think you can win what should be a safe Liberal seat, given 3, not just pluralities in a row, but majorities in a row for you?
Well, I lived through 2011, so I can't predict how voters will decide to send their messages, but obviously, if voters are really, really fed up, they will send a message. So I will lose, but I'm hoping that the work I've done as a constituent MP will be enough for them to return me to Ottawa. But that's my hope.
Well, Ms. Mendes, just one last question then. What do you want to see come out of this caucus retreat that could give you some hope that all these negative outcomes we've been discussing can be avoided? What do you want to see happen in the next couple of days?
Well, I'd like to see a message of a message that the leadership received from Canadians throughout the summer, and that they are ready and willing to put forth a very positive and very forceful policy change to engage Canadians again and to get Canadians excited about what the government is doing.
Okay.
That's what I would like to see.
Well, Liberal MP Alexandra Mendes, I want to thank you for your time. I want to thank you for your candor. Have a good caucus meeting. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Former Bank of Canada Governor Mark Carney has signed on to join the Liberal Party as an advisor on their economic strategy. This news comes as the Liberal caucus is convening in Nanaimo, British Columbia for their annual retreat. It'll be the first time meeting since NDP leader Jagmeet Singh ended their governance deal and since that by-election loss back in June. It comes amid fresh questions over whether Justin Trudeau should stay on as party leader.
Politics is a team sport and that we need to support each other.
He doesn't need to step down. No, we got a lot of policies that we could bring, and Mr. Trudeau has worked hard.
It's comforting to know that we do have a prime minister who's not intimidated by everyone, trying to say that, we're looking for a replacement from him.
The prime minister isn't being given the credit he deserves, I think, for the many, many wonderful things he did. But on the other hand, if I listen to my constituents, which is supposedly what we are meant to do, yes, I have to say that we would have to change leadership.
Joining me now is Nova Scotia Liberal MP Kody Blois, who's also the chair of the Atlantic Caucus. Mr. Blois, thanks for joining us. Good to see you again.
Hi, David. Thanks for the invite.
You heard what Alexandra Mendes says her constituents are telling her. What are your constituents telling you?
Look, my constituents this summer were excited about the Olympics. They were excited about Wyatt Sanford, a number of policy issues. Yes, of course, it's well established that there are some folks that have some fatigue with the Prime Minister's leadership, but I want to be very clear, David. There was a lot of my constituents that are concerned about Pierre Poilievre and the direction he could presumably take the country if he were to win the next election. And so, yes, of course, you're going to have some folks on the doorstep that may or may not like the government's agenda, may have concerns with the Prime Minister. But I heard a lot about concerns about Pierre Poilievre and the desire to make sure that the Liberal Party can be in fighting shape to not allow him to govern the country when in time that decision comes in the next election.
But I'm sure you've heard and read what Ms. Mendes said earlier today and what she repeated in the interview she just did with us, that it's not the party, it's not the policies, but her constituents in a riding that has voted more than 50% Liberal 3 straight elections say he can't win, he has to go, and she isn't confident you can win unless there's change.
I didn't see her comments explicitly. I appreciate before we jumped on together, I heard her comments a little bit in my ear. Look, everyone's entitled to their thoughts on this. I come to Nanaimo as a member of Parliament, chair of the Atlantic Caucus, focused on the initiatives that I believe are important for my riding, that I believe are important for our region. Of course, I'm going to want to have conversations with my colleagues about how best we position the party for fighting chance. The Prime Minister has won 3 elections. He's a fighter. If he says he has the ability to stay on and believes that there's a pathway, I'll go into battle with the Prime Minister, because I can tell you, regardless of whether or not there is some fatigue on the Prime Minister, the prospect of a Pierre Poilievre government is something I don't want to see. So I'm not going to dabble a whole lot in the speculation, should he go, should he not. He's been very clear that he wants to stay on, and our focus as a party is how we best support him and, frankly, our caucus and our party to be the best vehicle for Canadians' interests in the days ahead.
But as Atlantic Caucus Chair, as part of the caucus leadership, you would have been consulted by the Prime Minister and his people after the St. Paul's by-election to get a sense of the mood of the caucus, and you would have had the input from the MPs in the Atlantic region. You heard what I heard, that everybody wants change. Are you seeing the sort of change that people want internally? Because we're seeing chiefs of staff leave, we're seeing the national campaign director leave, but there's not cabinet change, there's not senior staff change, and to this point, there isn't really a massive policy change. What are you seeing?
Look, I would agree with the fact that we do have to be focused on meeting the needs for Canadians, and I think that is going to have to result in adjustments across the board. You mentioned chief of staffs, David. Look, good people in politics come and go. It was the same in the 2019 election when we won. The media is going to want to speculate on that. Jeremy Broadhurst has been very clear that he wants, he has to spend time with family. He's contributed a lot to this party. So look, The fact that you mentioned off the hop that Mark Carney is going to be here at the caucus, he's going to be helping to form our economic agenda, I think sends a really important signal. He is someone that is deeply credible in this space. I think it's great that anytime a former governor of the Bank of Canada or governor of the Bank of England wants to contribute to any political party, frankly, that's a good thing. That's one example. And I know the conversations that we're going to be having this week will also help to position ourselves as we go into the fall parliamentary session. We have some really good things that we've done that I would never suggest that we're going to walk back. The question is, how do we protect the progress that we've made on particularly social policy, that Pierre Poilievre is non-committal. He's not saying to my seniors in Kings Hants whether or not he would maintain the dental program we established. He's being very coy as it relates to whether or not he even has an environmental agenda, which I think the message so far is no, he doesn't. So there is going to be contrast in the days ahead. We need to be constantly focused on making sure that we're meeting the needs and the mood of Canadians, and that's exactly why part of the work we're doing here in Nanaimo is not only on policy and initiatives, but making sure that we're getting it right as it relates to strategy.
Well, I appreciate Mr. Carney's expertise and his resume. The only person in the world to ever be the head of two central banks of G7 countries, the Bank of Canada and the Bank of England. But isn't developing an economic and productivity agenda the job of Chrystia Freeland, Minister Champagne, Minister Boissonnault, the other 35, 36 members of cabinet? Why do you have to bring in an unelected Liberal to help develop the strategy as opposed to the cabinet doing it?
No, look, we have very capable players around the team. Those people that you mentioned are all stalwarts in their own right. And, you know, I'm not going to suggest that we haven't had a strong economic record. We have the best fiscal position in the G7. We've seen significant economic growth, but we are at a crossroads right now, what's happening around the world. War in Ukraine, war in the Middle East, increasing uncertainty around the geopolitics. We have a big choice coming up in the United States, not we, but certainly the Americans do, that could have implications to our own economic situation. David, you're never going to be able to suggest to me that we as a party should not bring in someone with Mark Carney's credentials and acumen to help support the great team that we already have.
Okay, so but what is it you think your fellow caucus members, other MPs, need to hear by the end of this caucus retreat to calm down the anxieties that were spilling over after St. Paul's and maybe are bubbling a little bit with Le Salle-Mar Verdun coming up on the 16th? Because that one looks tight too. I mean, having Carney inside the tent a little bit more, I think, would reassure a lot of people, but he's not running. He's not a candidate at this point, and he's not in cabinet. What do you think the leadership needs to demonstrate to people like Alexandra Mendes to give them hope that you can win next year?
Look, I think each caucus member will bring their own perspective in that, and for me to try to stereotype that across 154 Liberal members of Parliament may not be fair on national television. What I would say is I think we need to do a couple things. And my suggestion, my remarks to the Prime Minister has been to remind Canadians of the programs that we have delivered that are making a difference across the country. I could list them off ad nauseum in terms of what we've been able to establish. But at the same time, it's about sending the message about where we're going. And I think that is what this is going to be focused on. The Prime Minister has been active engaging caucus. Each member has had the opportunity to engage with him and the cabinet. And I think that this caucus here will help making sure that we can set the best agenda moving forward. Look, for me, there's some real clear contrast between us and the Conservatives. Again, a lot of the focus wants to be on the Prime Minister, but at the same time, we have to look at what Pierre Poilievre is putting forward. No agenda on environment or climate, non-committal on the social programs we've established about whether or not he would keep them. His bombastic nature. David, you cover politics. For a guy that qualified for a pension at 31 will be eligible for it at 55 to suggest to the leader of the NDP that somehow he's not in it for the right reasons for Canadians. That's the kind of politics we've seen in the United States. That's not the kind of politics we need in this country. And I'll jump in the ditch a little bit to hit him over the head. I mean, the guy represents Carleton, 30 minutes outside of the House of Commons, and is at Stornoway. Hundreds of thousands of dollars of taxpayers' dollars. I don't begrudge that fact that he does that, but when he goes out and sends letters to Jagmeet Singh and suggests that he doesn't have integrity around why he's serving in Parliament, that is not the type of politics we want. I think the more that Canadians see that, he runs the risk of isolating voters, and our job is to make sure that we're meeting them where they need to be.
Okay, we're just out of time. I got to squeeze in one more. The defense of your record, all the things you've done, I get. The critique of Mr. Poilievre, you just laid it out there. But the pitch for the future is the third missing piece. And when the Prime Minister was on the show earlier this year, I asked him, what he needs a fourth term for. What does he need to do? And he said to continue to meet the moment. That's a status quo answer. What is the pitch for the future you expect to come out of this by the end of the caucus?
The Prime Minister will have his own ideas on what that is, I'm sure. Again, I think right now it's reminding Canadians of the social progress that we've made. But when I look at the two major public policy issues facing the country, I think it's continuing to position the Canadian economy for future success and also Canada's place in the world. This is probably the most uncertain world that we've been in the last 100 years. Canada has a contributing role that we can play, and I think mapping out those two agendas, reminding Canadians of the progress we've made, reminding the fact that we will protect that progress when Pierre Poilievre will walk it back. Those two angles, those two conversations, I think will be extremely important. But there's other voices in the caucus. I'm but one. The Prime Minister will have his own ideas, and we look forward to being able to present our vision in the days ahead.
Okay, we look forward to seeing it, see what the details are. Thank you so much. That's Nova Scotia Liberal MP Kody Blois. But at least one premier says any talk of an early election is just a bluff.
MP Singer, he's just blowing smoke. There's nothing more important to these greedy politicians than collecting a pension. And he was elected in October 2019, and October 19th, 2019. And I'll be floored, and I'll stand up here and apologize to all the greedy politicians if he calls the election early. But let's face it, he wants his pension. He's not going anywhere until October, let's say 20th, 2025.
Okay, there's a lot there for a Monday in September, so let's bring in the power panel. Lisa Raitt is a former Conservative cabinet minister. Brad Levine is a former communications director for the NDP. And here with me in the studio, Vandana Cotter is a former advisor to Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, while Rob Russo is my old boss, the former CBC parliamentary bureau chief. It's good to see you all again. Brad, saw you last week. It's good to see the rest of you. Vandana, what did you make of Alexandra Mendes? Still supports the Prime Minister, thinks he has an excellent record, thinks he's been a transformative Prime Minister for the people of Canada, but her constituents say he's got to go. What do you make of the argument she's laid out?
I'm not sure if she made an argument. I think she was trying to say what she's been hearing. But I think you're going to hear different things from different MPs. I mean, you heard Kody Blois earlier as well, saying that people are worried about Pierre Poilievre. And I think you'll hear a lot of MPs across the country hearing the same kind of notion, that necessarily that people are voting against, like, for Pierre Poilievre. But maybe they want change. Change can be a lot of things.
Right.
People would like chicken to be less expensive, or a number of things on their day-to-day items. They want housing to be more affordable, things that the government is already working towards. So I think, you're hearing what people are going to feel, but they're going to go to a caucus meeting, probably hear from the Prime Minister. I'm sure they'll hear from party operatives. They'll hear from different staff members of what plans they'll be having to move forward, and I think they'll feel a bit better after that.
Rob, though, she didn't sound optimistic at all, right? Like, she doesn't think, she's not saying the Prime Minister should go. She is conveying the message from her constituents. She is still personally loyal to the man, and you can appreciate that.
The dog didn't eat her homework. The constituents ate her homework.
Well, but there was a note of despair.
Yes.
When talking about her chances.
Yes. Look, she essentially said in her writing, the Prime Minister is, to coin a phrase by Peter MacKay, the stinking albatross around her neck. I thought it was remarkable up until now. Many of us have had whispers poured into our ear of the scorn that's out there for the Prime Minister from Liberal MPs. I thought it was remarkable that up until now, much of that had been restricted to a single MP who's not running again. But here we have an MP who is running again and is worried about what the Prime Minister could do to her chances of winning in an election. As you pointed out, she's won majorities, not pluralities.
Yeah, like 50% was her worst, and that was in 2015.
And we had her say quite clearly that next Monday's result is key to the future of the Prime Minister. So I now look to see whether or not more MPs are going to come out after Monday, depending on the result, and say what Ms. Mendes is saying openly now and what others have been saying privately, in that they feel like the Prime Minister is dragging them down. And in the chateau fort of the Liberal Party right now in Quebec.
So, Lisa, I mean, I guess the concern, as if you're the party leadership, is that Ms. Mendes broke the ice, and more people might do that as caucus gathers in Nanaimo. I guess your hope is that she's a one-off. What did you make of how things have started out in Nanaimo?
Well, I sat with Alexandra Mendes in the House of Commons, and she is fearless, always has been. But I think the differentiator here is that she's not actually one that's trying to get into cabinet or a PS position. She's on a different track, as you know. She's on the side of being speaker or deputy speaker. So that kind of brings with it a little bit of a different perspective, quite frankly. She's not beholden to anybody about making decisions of what she's going to do. So she's got a little bit more freedom, and she's always been very outspoken. So I think this tracks very much with me. I don't think that just because she came out and said it and Wayne said it, that others are going to follow, because there's still this great desire to have the Prime Minister come to your riding or be parliamentary secretary or one day be in the cabinet.
Brad, what are your thoughts?
Well, what I found interesting is that, I mean, she's taken the Liberal caucus message right off the rails here. This is what we're talking about here. This is supposed to be a reboot for the Liberals, at least trying to set an agenda for the upcoming parliamentary session, which starts in just a short week from now. And she was saying it before Lassalle-Marde. She wasn't even suggesting that the Prime Minister's leadership would be in question among her constituents if he couldn't hold a very safe Liberal seat, the second one that he could lose in less than 3 months. Toronto St. Paul's earlier in the summer was a safe Toronto seat. So she's not even hedging whether or not he loses it. She's saying flat out that the constituents in the South Shore riding, which she represents, of Montreal, have already made up their mind. And I think you were asking the question to the MP. If Trudeau can't win the constituents of Brossard, St. Lambert, and the South Shore of Montreal, and if he can't win Lassalle-Marde, then where will he be winning in the next election campaign? This is going to have a tremendous, I think, impact on what the conversation is going to be like in Nanaimo.
So, Vandana, you have this. I mean, in some ways, she is taking the message of the caucus public, because a lot of MPs have been saying a version of this, really, since St. Paul's. But it's on a day when the Mark Carney formal role gets announced, that he's going to be an economic advisor to the leader of the Liberal Party, not necessarily to the Prime Minister. So I don't know if that's a platform development role or if it's a policy development role or what that is. I mean, what did you make of the Carney news and sort of this role that is coming in with this sort of drama unfolding behind it?
I think it's part of the changes that caucus have wanted to see. Bringing in new people, new ideas, people who are, I know Mark Carney says he's a Liberal, but he's never, I'm not sure how much door knocking he's done. I'm not sure if he's prior to all this or prior leadership in business has been a Liberal specifically, but someone with outside ideas and different experience. Listen, we're at a really interesting point in Canada. We need to drive productivity. We need economic growth. We have to deal with major issues like housing and how do we drive up jobs and good jobs for Canadians, and Mark Carney can have a view on that. And I think what our caucus wants is to know that, are we looking for other people? Are we looking past our blind spots? And I think Mark Carney brings that, because he won't be worried about anything. He's going to say exactly what he feels. He's going to say, this is what Canada needs to have. And he'll bring an economic perspective that I think a lot of people, and I do work on Bay Street, will be looking for. So I think it helps boost some credibility. I think also, on top of that, I think the caucus will feel like if this is part of the changes, I can be open to that.
Okay, well, he won't be worried about anything, as in his position and his role, not the issues and the problems. That's what you meant by that, right?
Yeah. I mean, he's not...
I just wanted to clarify. I didn't want people to think you're saying he doesn't care.
Oh, no. I think he's not going to be worried about what are people going to think about his policy or ideas. He's just going to drive them.
Rob, what do you think of that? I mean, there is change that needs to be demonstrated to caucus, which is one thing, but then there's the larger change that needs to be demonstrated to Canadians. And while Carney may satisfy some of the more economically minded Liberals, the more, centrist Paul Martin style of Liberal, what does it do for Alexandra Mendes's voters in Brossard, St. Lambert, and the voters in Lassalle-Marde Verdun?
Well, if you, I'm sure that if you were to ask Mark Carney what he thought the best thing that he could do for the Liberal Party would be right now, and what advice he would have if he were advising the Prime Minister, candidly, he would say to the Prime Minister, you should resign and I should be replacing you. Because Mark Carney's been asked not once, not twice, but 3 times to serve in the government. In 2019, he was asked, said he couldn't do it.
To run, right?
Yeah. In 2021, he was asked, decided not to do it. He said his daughters are just getting settled in Ottawa, didn't want to do it. He was asked publicly a month ago by the Prime Minister, yeah, I really like Mark Carney. I wish he would come and join us. He chose not to do it. I think we have to conclude that Mark Carney does not want to serve in government under this PM. And so, ideas, yes, they're a great idea. I think the MP Kody from Nova Scotia that you had on earlier gave a pretty good blueprint in general as to what the Liberals might want to think about. They have to think about the future. Nobody's going to solve the housing problem for 10 years, but somebody needs to construct a credible bridge to that future, to the solutions on housing, accommodation, on the economy. And if somebody could do that in a credible way that gives people hope, that's a good thing. But Mark Carney might be able to do that, but I think the best thing that he thinks could happen to the Liberal Party would be if he ran it.
Okay, you flinched, Vandana, just quickly, because I want to get to Lisa
Sure,
Murat.
of course. I actually think that politics is a people game. It's not a policy game. People, you have to connect with people. I think sometimes I think about Mark Carney thinking about actually working in politics, and he may not actually want that job because you're not just being the Prime Minister. You're also the leader of the Liberal Party of Canada.
Right.
And that means meeting with the riding president of whatever small town that you represent, right? Not everyone wants to do that. I actually think this is a perfect role for him. You know, I've seen him speak. I've seen him speak in front of a podium. I haven't seen him at a barbecue. At a people where there's families and gatherings and other things where he's not driving the agenda to talk about. So I think actually this is a great role for him. I think this may not be something where he wants to do. So not everyone actually wants the job when they realize what the job is, but he wants to influence the party in a way that he thinks will be helpful to the country.
Okay, Lisa, what do you make of this move for the former governor of 2 central banks coming on board here?
So many thoughts, David. As you know, Anne McClellan and I, 4 years ago, started the Coalition for a Better Future, talking about this issue, long-term economic growth. So we welcome the Prime Minister and Mark Carney to the party. It definitely is something that needs to be dealt with. But I would say very candidly that this is not a government advisory role. This is very clearly a Liberal Party of Canada role. You may never see the results of the report, whatever that report is going to be. Sorry about that. I know that I've left that. You're not giving me a thumbs up.
No, there's just I just saw a bubble flying across the screen, but okay.
Sorry about that. I don't want people to suddenly lose their minds.
That's okay.
The second part of it, if I could just quickly go there. Look, there better not be a single resource of the government of Canada or the taxpayer dollar used in this exercise. No briefing notes, no assistance, no helpful staffers, no setting up tour. This all has to come out of the Liberal Party's pocketbook or out of Mark Carney's wallet himself. But if this touches anything to do with the government of Canada, then they're utilizing government of Canada resources for political partisan purposes, and that is not on. If he wants to do it for the government of Canada and the people of Canada, then become an OIC and do it the right way.
Brad, your thoughts on Mark Carney and also on Doug Ford's intimate knowledge of Jagmeet Singh's pension dates.
Excellent. Yes, it's good to be back on Mondays, David. on Mark Carney. What I find most interesting is not only the fact that he's a Liberal Party employee as opposed to a Government of Canada advisor. I found, to Lisa's point, I found that interesting. But also the timing as to where we are in the government's kind of tenure. Even if we do go to the end of the cycle, which is October 2025, there's 13 months left in this government mandate. Even if Trudeau survives that, or the Liberal government survives that, is this really you're in year 4 of a 4-year term? Is this really the time to bring in somebody to talk about long-term economic? This is normally you'd think that this is something you do at the beginning of a fresh mandate, where you got a long runway. You can start seeing some of the implementation, maybe some of the changes. Yes, there's some long-term thinking that the government should be doing for sure. Housing, economic development, those kinds of things. But nobody's ever going to see anything that Mr. Carney is going to be advising on, because there's just no time for it to take effect and it to go down. I mean, I know that some Liberals and Freeland was talking about how the economy is getting better. Canadians can't feel that. They can't see that. So I find the timing to be completely off, and there's no runway for Mr. Carney's advice to take hold. As for Mr. Ford's comment on Mr. Singh, this is a Poilievre trope about Mr. Singh only hanging on, as if the government is entirely. I love it when people give all the mandate of a government to the fourth party, but certainly with the balance of power, Mr. Singh has some say.
Well, it's a choice between him and Pierre Poilievre now, Brad. We talked about this last week. That's what he says.
This is a Poilievre trope, and what's rich about Conservatives who go after Mr. Singh on pensions? Pierre Poilievre had his pension before he was turned 30 years old. Okay, not only that, he said in his early days, 2 terms and every MP should quit. That was, he started 20 years ago. He's been at this. But worse than that, David, on Poilievre and pensions, not only did he get his pension before he turned 30, which most Canadians don't get, he then used his opportunity in government to raise the retirement age from 65 to 67. So he got his when he was 30, but then started taking away millions of Canadians' pension opportunities, and by raising the ceiling from 65 to 60. So if you want to debate Singh on pensions, I think most of Democrats would say bring it on.
Stephen Harper announced that, right?
Yeah, but Poilievre was in the.
He was overseas. Was World Economic? I think he was at the WEF, right? He was at the World Economic Forum, or he was overseas at a G7 or something, where he announced this. I've not seen that as part of Mr. Poilievre's positioning.
Poilievre was in the government that was trumpeting this idea.
Right. Okay. Rob, quick final thoughts on Doug Ford weighing in on Jagmeet Singh's pension.
Yeah, it's a black swan day when the leader of the Conservative Party of Ontario is a stout defender of keeping the current Liberal government in office until next October.
And fixed election dates.
I never thought I would see that.
Okay. All right.